Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 66 of the USMB Lead Pods. I'm your host, Matt Ayersman, and we've got a topic today that, unfortunately, all of us could probably use some help with. We're talking about conflict management today, conflict resolution, one of those things that, unfortunately, we just can't get around this side of heaven. And if you're like me, unfortunately, the political stuff is already ramping up, in which Thanksgiving's just around the corner, and so you might have some difficult conversations over the next couple weeks. But luckily, we've got your back here on Lead Pods, and we're tackling this subject with two people that I look up to and respect a lot. I'm really excited for you to hear my conversation with Haude and Wendell Loewen. Many of you probably know both of them. Wendell's been at Tabor for a long time, kind of an MB legend, and Erica is a counselor, and she's been in the MB family for a long time as well. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Both of them wrote articles for the most recent issue of Christian Leader, where they talk about conflict resolution, and they've got a really great biblical approach, but they've also have some really practical things that all of us can work on. So it's a very timely conversation, one that I really enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you. So let's get right to my conversation with Erica and Wendell about conflict resolution.
MB Foundation provides biblical financial stewardship solutions to the Mennonite Brethren community. We assist individuals, pastors, churches, and organizations in their gathering, management, and distribution of financial resources for Christ and His kingdom. Our services include planned giving, loans, fund management, investment certificates, and stewardship education. We are ready to serve you from our offices in Hillsborough, Kansas, and Fresno, California. If you'd like to learn how financial stewardship solutions could benefit you, visit www.mbfoundation.com or call us today at 1-800-551-1547. MB Foundation is pleased to partner with USMB to bring you this episode of Lead Pods.
All right, my friends. Well, today we have an evergreen topic that I'm excited to dive into with, I've mentioned on here before, I'm a proud Sterling College alum, but these are two really cool people I like a lot who are from Tabor. So I have to, eat my Sterling pride a little bit today and introduce you to some friends. Most of you probably know, joined by Wendell Loewen. Wendell's been on the show before. We were just chatting. He's got a kind of a new role at Tabor as a special assistant to the president, but he's also still teaching in youth and church and culture stuff over there at Tabor. So Wendell, welcome back to Lead Pods.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We've also got Erica Haude with us. She's a licensed clinical professional counselor over at Central Kansas Counseling. And Erica was also, for a brief time, one of my youth leaders when I was in high school. So, Erica, I should have asked you ahead of time. You probably have some kind of embarrassing high school story about me, but we'll save that for another episode. How about that?
Sounds good. I'm sure I could dig up some pictures somewhere.
Well, Erica, glad to have you on as well. Thanks for being here.
It's good to be here.
So today we're talking about conflict, managing conflict. And again, that's something that all of us are unfortunately aware of. And especially in this kind of heated culture we're in, I think we're having to deal with this maybe more now than we did maybe a handful of years ago. And so both of you wrote articles for Christian Leader in the new issue that'll be coming out here shortly. So I'll go ahead and give a plug. Whenever that issue comes out, make sure you check out those articles. But I guess let's start here. You guys both have a lot of experience helping people through conflict, both Erica as a counselor and Wendell, I'm sure, I know you do counseling as well, but also just in your work with youth and church stuff. Am I making it up, or do you guys think it's true? Do you feel like the world is just more conflict? Like, it feels like the world's constantly just ready to blow up in flames at any moment right now. Do you guys both feel that, both like in your practice and in your just day-to-day lives? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I feel like that I see a lot more people trying to figure out how to do conflict well and feeling the tension. And I think there's been a lot in the last, 5, 6, 7 years that has given opportunity for there to be division. There's a lot of issues. And I think, there's really interesting research that comes out of places like the Pew Research Center about how we're becoming really polarized. And really what that means is just we're becoming a little bit more entrenched and extreme on the ends of the spectrum. So we're moving in some ways away from each other. And those groups then we start to feel like, oh, they're so different from us, or they think or believe so differently. And so we kind of lose that in-between space, which I think is where a lot of the connection can happen. So yeah, right. We've seen it in politics. We saw it with the pandemic and some of the issues that came out of that, just disagreements about how to handle things. And so I think people feel that, right? And they're feeling that in really personal ways, and wrestling with what does it mean to be in relationship with people that I don't necessarily agree with on a lot of things. And so what does it mean to have relationships above issues, right? To kind of, to still care about topics and issues, but also still remain in relationship with people.
Yeah, Matt, you raised a really good question. As I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if we're seeing more and more conflict and it's becoming increasingly vocalized. I'm not sure if human nature has really changed. I mean, we see conflict all throughout history. We see it in scripture. As Erica said, there's been more opportunity to vocalize our views and opinions, and we feel freer to do that. However, at a really deep human level, we've always been in conflict, and I'm not sure. So much of life is built around fear, what we might lose, our sense of identity, and there's a lot of insecurity and fear that's out there. And it's just kind of some of the things we've seen with politics and the pandemic and other things have just shed a spotlight or given a gateway to lots of stuff coming out that's maybe been kept underneath the surface for a while. But, conflict is natural and normal. It's a very real part of our human experience. So without I don't want to get in trouble here, but I've sometimes said that conflict in and of itself is not sin. It's natural and normal. However, how we handle conflict could become sin. So that's, what do we do with reconciliation and moving toward that? That's something we need to be working on, and how to manage conflict well.
Well, I'll just get, especially as Christians, right? It always makes me so sad when very public, famous, whatever Christians handle conflict really poorly, or even Christian leaders in our own lives. When we do it badly, it just stings a little bit more, doesn't it? Like, we should be better. we can do better, right?
Just that the how we handle it is so important. And I think, I've listened to and read some really interesting things over the last several years about, obviously, how social media and the way in which we are communicating, right, has shifted and changed from these sitting around the table and having these conversations in our home to, it's a lot of things have moved online and moved into a more public space. And so, we're voicing our opinions in a way without that kind of human connection all the time. And so I think that maybe is why it feels for people really challenging, because at least in my work, and I work with a lot of adolescents, but I also work with a lot of adults. And what I see is people we're not used to using those skills because we're not used to, how do I sit with someone face to face, right? Or how do I handle this in a way that doesn't exacerbate it and just make it worse? And so the skills of how to handle the conflict. So I think, what Wendell was saying about conflict in and of itself not being sin or wrong, but then what do we do with that? I think it's challenging. I mean, it's challenging for me. And that's, in my article, I mentioned this, it's challenging for me. And I technically am, quote unquote, a professional in this area, and it's still challenging. So I think the how really matters.
And Erica, your article, you outlined some really kind of practical things for us to wrestle with, think about when we're dealing with this. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for that. But Wendell, in your article, you kind of give the biblical example of Jacob and Esau. And I think that's just a good story to kind of like a biblical example. And I think a lot of times we read these stories and they almost feel like fable, like they're so familiar and they're so old that we kind of forget that they were real people who had a real family issue. And I think kind of having a fresh perspective on it is kind of helpful. So can you remind us of that story and what did you kind of pull from it?
Yeah, there's a really interesting way to look at the Jacob and Esau story in Genesis. It spans a number of chapters, but what's interesting is the name Jacob means grasper and go-getter, usurper. He's a trickster. That's kind of his way. And I mean, the conflict all goes all the way back to their birth, trying to wrestle to see who gets out first. But he steals Esau's ancestral blessing and he tricks his father. And then Esau vows to kill him. And so, with the help of Rebekah, Jacob flees and spends years with his uncle Jacob or Uncle Laban, sorry, in the hill country, and there he's doing deals with his uncle too, and creating conflict there. But then eventually, God tells Jacob it's time to go home. So we see a couple of movements there. One is that Jacob, when there's this the onset of the conflict or the injustice is raised, he flees, and he moves away. And then after his time there, there's a turning. God doesn't promise things will necessarily go well, but God promises to be present with him. And the scriptures say he set his face toward home, toward Esau, toward his enemy. And then there's this daring journey back. And the night before, he's to meet up with Esau. He's at the ford of the river Jabbok, and there's a wrestling match all night. And who did he wrestle with? Well, the scriptures, the word is ish. It's a man, right? It's a very generic term. And so we can fill in, was he wrestling with? Some angel? Is he wrestling with Esau? Is he wrestling with some guy jumping out of the bush? Mm-hmm. Or is he wrestling with God? And all of those can be wrapped into that. But Jacob determines that he wrestled with God and calls the place Peniel, and he limps away because he said, I saw the face of God, and yet my life was spared. Well, the next day he meets up with Esau, and Esau says, well, what do all these gifts mean? And he says, I wanted for you to see me favorably. And Esau said, I don't need all these gifts. But then Jacob says, for me to see your face is like seeing the face of God. And how do we see the face of God in our enemy? Mm-hmm. So Jacob has this journey of fleeing, turning, and then coming back toward reconciliation, coming back toward his enemy. And we can see that pattern in most, if not all, of our conflicts in some way. Usually our initial reaction is distance, whether that's psychological, emotional, spiritual, or even physical. We just leave. And then we wrestle, or, finally God says, it's time to make things right. Mm-hmm. And then we have to take this journey back toward reconciliation. And how can we pursue our enemy with God's help and see them as, see the face of God in our enemy.
Yeah. Love how you pulled that out, Wendell. And have you guys heard this song? I think there's a song called Brother by the Brilliants. There's that line, when I look into the face of my enemy, I see my brother. And I think that's just so powerful. And Erica, that's kind of a good segue to a lot of the things that you outline. I think when we're in conflict, it's natural for us to just think about our side of things, right? Like that we're us, we're thinking from our perspective. But I think if we have any hope of resolution, we have to think from the other perspective, right? And I think that's some of what you were kind of pulling out, was kind of the curiosity, seeing the good in others, taking a look from a different perspective. Can you talk about that? Anything else you want to pull out from Wendell?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say, like, one of the things about what Wendell's saying that I think it can be really helpful is that space, right? So the kind of what he's talking about, like our tendency is to want to kind of flee. And I talk about in a little bit the importance of discerning. And I think it's just this awareness of, am I taking space in a healthy way? Like, am I distancing myself because, like he said, I need to wrestle, I need to process, I need to pray about this, I need to seek wise counsel, or am I avoiding? And
Mhm.
there's like that's an important distinction, I think, because there are times where space and distance can be a really helpful thing, when we are in these kind of conflicted, tense relationships or spaces.
Mhm.
But I think there's a kind of a caution there that we don't start to just avoid, because that's where conflict can get really unhealthy, when we're just avoiding it because it's uncomfortable and these conversations are difficult. I mean, the work of reconciliation is work. I mean, it is, I think it's important. And, Jesus talked about it, about how we were supposed to be agents of reconciliation, and that there is very much this part as a believer of doing this work of reconciliation. But it's challenging, and it requires a level of humility and self-awareness, wisdom. And so, yeah, I just think I really appreciate, Wendell, what you're saying about how, the full circle, right? Because it's not just fleeing. There's a turning and and a coming back that I think is really important, and we have to see that whole picture. So yeah, I mentioned humility. Another way to say that is curiosity. So I just think, and this is something the Lord has really been working on with me, is just, instead of, I think there's a tendency, and if you kind of study social psych, there's this tendency for us to want to kind of group ourselves,
Mhm.
to create in groups and out groups. It's how we organize ourselves socially. It's how we organize ourselves in lots of ways, cognitively. And so to create these groups, the downside of that is that we start to say, well, if you're, this group means, if you're in this group, it means these certain characteristics or qualities about you. So we start to then, it's actually what leads into bias. So in group, out group can lay the foundation for bias or assumptions. And so what I think the antidote to that is curiosity, right? So if I see you as holding a different position, or believing something different, to kind of bridge that and to break out of that natural way of kind of grouping, I think we got to get curious. We have to ask questions. Like, we have to be willing to hear from someone, why do you believe that? Or how did you reach that conclusion? Or there's typically a story, right? There's some part of
Yeah.
that person's story that led them to that place. And so if we can start to say, and we can start to be willing to say, like, what is it about what's happened to you, or what you've seen, or what you've gone through, or what you've been taught that has led you to this conclusion? Not only does that help us understand and like hold on to that relationship, but
Mhm.
it gives us some space to talk.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
now I've got something to talk with you about, and a
Mhm.
place instead of it just being talking points. And I think that kind of goes back to like what we see being modeled, like in the media or even
Mhm.
on social media, like, is a lot of talking points. Well,
Yeah.
talking points aren't really that helpful because they only give us like a Polaroid view
Mhm.
of what's really like a documentary, right? Like, it's like this bigger arch, this bigger story. And so I think getting curious and being like willing to listen and try to understand what's the story of that person and how did they get to this place.
Mhm.
And that's challenging. I mean,
Yeah.
it is. Like, even as I've tried to live this out and practice this with people in my life, like sometimes their answers to my, what I would say, curious questions, I'm like, now I still don't know what to say to that. Like,
Yeah.
so I want people to know, like, it takes, it it's, we have to be willing to engage, right? Like, we just have to be, it's a posture of humility. So I think, I talk about that. I talk about, in the article, I share some just ways in which the Holy Spirit has prompted me to kind of move from a place of judgment to a
Mhm.
place of curiosity, and how that's been really helpful in
Mhm.
shifting, my posture towards people.
I think that's excellent, and it's just so important for all of us to do. And I guess one of my next questions is, if we are on a similar journey that sounds like you're on, where we we've kind of recognized that we're biased. We recognize that maybe we don't have we're trying to be curious, whatever. At some point, the person that we're in conflict with may not be in the same spot. They may not be willing to be curious. They may not be willing to open themselves out to a different opinion.
Yep.
So what do you do? Like, there's kind of conflict with a healthy person, and then there's conflict with an unhealthy person, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
how do you
Yeah.
figure out which person you're talking to, and what's kind of a next step if it's not going well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's in the wrestling, right? So I think kind of even talking about, like, going back to what Wendell was saying about just that wrestling that can happen. And, you're right. Like, there are times where the other person isn't healthy, or they're not willing to engage, that they don't hold the same goal. So I talk about in the article, just like keeping the goal. I believe as believers, our goal should be to, reconcile relationships wherever we can. That relationships are what matters, right? It matters more than being right. But sometimes the other person does not have that same goal, right? They don't care as much about the relationship, or they're just not willing to do the work, right? With us, alongside us. And so I think we also have to know that it's okay sometimes to disengage, right? And we can do that in a way that's really healthy, that's really respectful. I think that's where we get into boundaries, right? And I often say boundaries are not so much these walls that we put up. It's a way of saying, this is how I'm willing to be, to engage. This is how I want to be treated. Boundaries are really helpful. It's when I work with kids, I often explain, like, imagine playing a soccer game without any out of bounds lines, and how frustrating, and like it wouldn't be fun. Right. Nobody would want to do that, because it would just be chaos, right? And so boundaries are really healthy. And I think even when we're talking about conflict, sometimes we come to a place in a relationship with someone where it's just like, okay, you've kind of like bumped up against a boundary, or maybe there's a boundary I need to establish here, and maybe I need to disengage, and that's okay. Maybe we want different things, or and again, I don't know that means we can't circle back at some point, right? To go back to the Jacob and Esau story, where there's another opportunity of return. So it's not always really linear.
Right.
Right. It doesn't follow like a 3-step process, but there are times where space is healthy, or boundaries are healthy. And I think that's really important. And so it's an excellent question, because it isn't always going to end with, now we're best friends again. And I mean, sometimes, but not always. Or maybe we find a different way of being together. Go ahead, Wendell.
Yeah, what's interesting, I want to circle back to something about getting curious in a second, but Jacob and Esau, once they embraced, they parted ways. They weren't necessarily best bros after that. We don't know for sure, but the story kind of ends with them parting ways. I wanted to just say something about getting curious. That's a really good practical step. On the other hand, for me to get curious means I have to turn loose of my own fears. Am I really willing to enter into dialogue with someone who has with whom I have a deep disagreement? Where is this going to go? I don't know. What will they think of me? I don't know. Will my views of them change? I don't know. And so it's just so much easier to stay within the walls of my own fears and my own sense of a fearful identity. And that's been something that I've been wrestling with in the last several months, is who am I? Who does God say I am? And can I live out of that identity and live in a way that's fearless? And that means I can engage others and their views without a worry that, some things are going to fall apart in my own life, or they'll view me negatively. But for anyone to get curious means I have to turn loose of those. But also it means maybe I should be asking, I think that's what's underneath that idea is, what does their opinion, what does their view, or how they're handling things, what does it say about them?
Mm-hmm.
And is that worth learning about?
Mm-hmm.
So getting back into this journey of reconciliation, which is, by the way, John Paul Lederach wrote a book years ago called The Journey of Reconciliation. This is really, in a nutshell, the first chapter. That I've been rolling with this for 20 years, but not everyone is at the same point in the journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I might be ready to reconcile. I mean, this can happen in my own marriage or in anyone's relationship, and I'm chasing that person down, but they're still fleeing.
Mm-hmm.
So do we still chase them down? Do we try
Yeah.
to pull them? Well, they're not ready, and God needs to be doing the work in their lives so that flee stops
Mm-hmm.
and that they eventually turn. And then finally, when they're ready to journey toward reconciliation, now we're at a similar spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to understand the journey in my own life, but maybe see it in the life of someone else too. And
Yeah.
that, I think,
Yeah.
gives me some peace. Okay, they're not ready yet. All right,
Yeah.
let's keep praying and keep asking God to work. And I pray that they'll get there.
I think what you're
Yeah.
saying too, Wendell, is like there's so much need for clarity, right, in this process. Because like in some ways, what you're kind of talking about is like when we're in conflict, and maybe both people would recognize like that we're in conflict. And there's times where I feel something inside of me, and maybe that's a little bit more, I was writing from that place of like someone has said something or done something that doesn't feel good or right. And like they may not even know that we're in a disagreement. Like sometimes, right, like that happens where like one person is like, I'm upset.
Mm-hmm.
And the other person's like, I didn't even know. Right. So I think sometimes it's just clarity. Like we need clarity about like, where are we at? And even like in your example, Wendell, you know, like the other person's still fleeing. And that's where we need clarity. Like they're saying, I'm not ready. I'm not interested in reconciliation. I think it's important. And that's where I think that's one of those skills, right? It's important to be able to say, this is where I'm at. This is what I, you know, like my goal, like this is what I want to see happen. And the clearer we can get about where we're at, whether it's in a, you know, a relationship with one person or within a family or within a church, right? But just where are we at in this process? Because there is a process of dealing with conflict. And you know, going back a lot of years, I took Wendell's reconciliation. What's it called? What was the class
Conflict
called,
and
Wendell?
reconciliation.
Yeah, conflict and reconciliation class, right? And so Wendell has been running with that for a long time, but it's good stuff. And I think that the reason it still has teeth, right, is because it's such a part of being human. Is how do we do this well, and how do we? There's no way we're going to be in relationship with anyone without there being some conflict. And so it's just a part of the human condition here on earth. And so to the clarity about where we're at in the process and, you know, what our goals are and what do we want out of this can really help speed up some things, or at least avoid some of the more frustrating parts at times.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is if you were to do a survey and people were to write down all of the conflicts that they're wrestling with right now, most of their conflicts have the most intensity with the people that they love the most over the issues they care about the most.
Yep.
And so it's a very real human experience. We're in conflict so often. And what we tend to do these days is to try to dehumanize people and objectify them and label them. And that makes it easier to have a conflict or a disagreement with them. But as soon as we humanize them and learn their story, now will I continue to love this person, or will I try to love this person? Like that's the complexity of all of this, is because humans are complex, and we care about issues and we care about people. And then so I do an inventory with my students in this conflict class, and it's to try to get a handle on conflict styles, how much you care for the issue and how much you care for the relationship. And I always ask the question, once you took this survey, what do you think about the results? And they say, well, it depends. It depends what I'm fighting about, and it depends who I'm fighting with.
Yep.
And we're all over the map in terms of how we handle a conflict based on our relationship with them and what the issue is. And we're doing an internal work on how I'm going to handle this.
Yeah.
Wendell, I love that, what you're saying about like this tension point of people versus issues, right? And relationships versus issues. And when those collide, it's hard to figure out, but it makes me think about like how in those moments it's easier, going back to what you were saying about fear, right? It's easier to hide behind an issue. I feel it in my own life. Like it's easier to kind of hide behind, well, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. And we can even come up with some really great Bible verses for why we believe it, right? Like it's easier sometimes to go to that place than to sit in the messy, scary, like vulnerable place of being seen and having to let go of control and let go of the talking points. Like, and so I think maybe that's a bit of what I see happening sometimes. It's like, I care so much about this relationship, but I also and not that the issues aren't important. I mean, I think they are, but I just think that we have to keep those things in a healthy place, like when they collide and when there is that tension between them, because we can quickly like kind of hide behind the issue and forget about the beauty of the relationship. And I think as believers, we are really called to love, right? And we can't love people if we're not really valuing the relationship with them.
Right.
And that doesn't mean we're going to be like super, super close with everyone, but I think it means that we see, like you're saying, Wendell, we see the person, we humanize them. We respect and value and see the image of God in them. And so, yeah, I just think that's a really helpful framework, and that how Wendell was talking about that, and just that students, I love that students are wrestling with that. Those are super important like skills and just ways to conceptualize this.
Yeah. If we think about taking those two pieces, issues and relationships, and depending on the situation, we'll respond differently. So if I care about the issue and I want to win on that, and I don't care about the relationship, I'm going to be coercive and I'm going to force, because I'm going to win on this, and the relationship doesn't matter. If I care about the relationship more than the issue, well, then I'll accommodate. I'll give up some on that issue so I can keep the relationship. If I care about the issue some and the relationship some, I might sort of, compromise a little bit, and we kind of work out a deal. But if I don't care about either, I'm just going to avoid. I'm not going to try to work on the relationship or the issue. I don't care. And in some ways, avoiding is a power move. We all talk about the silent treatment. That's a way to use power. But if I care about the issue and the relationship, now it's going to take some hard work to win both. And you have to care about the other person, and how do you care about yourself and the issue to work out, I think, a healthy resolution.
Yeah, you can be true to yourself and true to what you believe and your convictions and your position, and still value people. And maybe what we're seeing is we're not seeing a lot of people do that well. We're not seeing really good models, right? Like, I don't know that we have models. I'm like thinking right now, like, who would I say I've witnessed and I've watched do that well? I don't know. I'd have to think about it. But I think, right, like that's what we need more of. We need more of what Wendell's describing, like more models of people saying, I care deeply about these issues or these things, right? these topics, but I also really care deeply about relationships and people. And I need to, as I'm thinking about it, like I follow an author and speaker, Carlos Whitaker, on Instagram and social media. And I actually think that this is something that he's doing pretty well. And he's really trying to walk this out well in that space of valuing people, but also not being silent and avoidant, like Wendell's saying, like still talking about the hard things and giving voice to the hard things and things that he believes. But doing it in a way that still holds space for people and values people. And I just think we need more examples of that in our everyday life and in our churches and on social, wherever we're at, right? We just need to see more of that and know that it's possible, know that it's possible to do that.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that, I don't know how much more toxic our culture can be right now. I'm
just jinxed it, Wendell. You just jinxed. Everybody knock on wood or whatever. You just jinxed. It's going to get worse now. Thanks, Wendell. So, keep going.
But I'm hopeful that enough people will say enough is enough. How can we value each other and still care about the issues, but move forward in a positive direction in our churches, in our relationships as a nation? I just don't see how this current direction is going to be good for anyone for much longer.
My favorite episodes of the show are when I don't have to do very much. I just sit back and listen to experts like you guys. This has been awesome. I'm learning a lot. Let me throw one more question at you. We need to start wrapping up here. But one thing that I'm thinking as you're speaking, and Eric, I love the idea of having more healthy examples. And I would love to be a healthy example. I would hope everyone listening, that would be our goal, that we can, whatever our family or community, whatever, that this little community that we have can be healthy examples of conflict. And that's part of the MB story, right? Like the whole peaceful reconciliation is kind of our gig. And so one thing I was thinking as you're speaking, and maybe you've already hit this, but I'm sure you have more to say too, that we've already mentioned that conflict resolution, like that's an action verb. Like it takes work. It takes, intentionality. Peace. We talked before that peacemaking is different from peacekeeping. Peacemaking requires action. And I think there's some of us, like I'm kind of this way, where I hate conflict, so I'm going to avoid it if I can. But that's not always good either, right? And so I guess as we kind of begin to wrap up, if we want to be those kind of people who can model healthy conflict resolution, one question I have is like, how do we know what's worth fighting about and what's not, right? And Wendell, I know that kind of culturally, this might be something that you've dealt with, especially right now. It's, we're getting into political season again, and everyone makes it out to be this is right, this is wrong, very black and white thinking. So maybe, especially like we were talking about, especially if there's a specific issue that people are really riled up about, how do we know if it's worth conflicting about or not? And I guess what are the kind of as we begin to wrap up, what other kind of practical lasting things can we do to be those kind of examples?
Well, yeah. How do you know if it's worth fighting about? I think if you hold, if it's a deeply held value to you, well, it's something. What are the hills you want to die on? What are the hills you want to stand on? And what are the issues that maybe there might be some flexibility there? I think, getting back to this idea of getting curious, we can, rather than talking about what we're against, how about talking about what we're for? So here's what I would hope for. Here's what I would prefer. Here's what I'd like to see happen here. And then you ask that of the other person, what is it that you want? What is it that you're for? And we might find some common ground there, some things that we agree on.
Yeah.
And another thing, I mentioned it in the article, but why do we keep yelling when we're in a conflict? It's because we don't feel we're being heard. So if I were to just slow down and say, I hear you, and then sort of repeat or summarize what you've heard them say, ask, did I get it right? Then the intensity of the conflict can slow down, it can calm down, and we can have a conversation. But I'm trying to understand them. And I think we can start to make progress.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind about when you asked Matt about how do we become these healthy models, and how do we kind of practice this, I think it starts with a lot of self-awareness. And I know that's a very therapist answer. um, but I believe that. I really believe that the more awareness we have about, like Wendell was describing, our own kind of patterns in conflict or our own tendencies in conflict, the more we understand our own motivation. And all of that means that we gotta sit with ourselves, right? We gotta sit with Jesus, and allow him to reveal some things. And there's some really great tools, right? Like maybe it's counseling, maybe it's the Enneagram, maybe it's, some of the resources that Wendell uses. Like, I think that, maybe it's, right, being like reading a book about conflict in a small group. Like, I think that there's lots of ways we can do this, but to do the work of becoming more self-aware, about how we respond in conflict and what's our go-to. And so, because I think that helps us then as we engage, we engage from a place of health. We engage from a place of like, oh, they just like, that's my own like trigger, that's my own thing coming up, right?
Yeah.
And so I think self-awareness. The other thing, and you mentioned this, like our tendency to want to go to black and white thinking and like how we're told right from wrong, right? Like this is right and this is wrong. And I think about like some of the recent issues that were voted on, and we were kind of told like you either vote this way or you're wrong. And I just think we have to be better at nuance. We have to be better at flexible thinking. Like there is just so much nuance to things, and we've lost that in some ways. We've lost the art of that. And maybe lost it is too strong of a word, but I just think we need to practice that. We need to practice being willing to say the word and instead of but. So like two things can all, be true about something. And like, how do I wrestle with that? Right. And so I often catch myself like when I use the word but, saying like, ooh, actually, could I put an and there instead? Could I, is that maybe more true? And so I just think practicing self-awareness, practicing a little bit more flexibility in our thinking, and getting a little bit more comfortable with the nuance is going to serve us well when we engage with people about things that we really care about. And I think we should care a lot about issues that affect people, because these issues that we're talking about, really there's a trickle down, they affect people. And so I think we should care deeply, but we should not lose sight of the humans in our, right around us, and that we're talking with and working alongside and worshiping with. So yeah.
Guys, that was great. Like, I feel like we could go for hours and hours and hours and still have a lot to talk about. But that was I think it was a great introduction. We need to probably wrap up here, but I want to encourage all of our listeners to check out those articles in Christian Leader. Thank you guys for your work and fleshing this out. And I think some of my takeaways from a biblical perspective, again, like this kind of conflict is not new, right? It might feel like the world is crumbling right now, and maybe it is, but it's not new. This has been going on forever. Bible has a lot to say about it. And I love, Eric, your steps, like being curious, putting the other person first, and some of that but and thing I think is so important. So lots of great things I hope that people listening can take away in their relationships. So let's be those examples, right? The world needs some examples. So let's be those kinds of people.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for being here. You can support the ministry and mission of USMB by making a donation on Giving Tuesday, November 29th. Choose between 3 giving destinations. You can help resource church planters in the new Church Planting Council, help train young MB leaders through the leadership pipeline, or help fund lead initiatives for pastors and leaders. Plan now to visit our website at usmb.org/givingtuesday on Tuesday, November 29 to give easily and securely online. Your gift can make a lasting impact through an investment in USMB. Well, thank you again for listening today. And part of my process as I'm editing this show after the interview is I always try to jot down some notes of things that I want to kind of remember or keep track of. And I had a lot of things in this episode, so I hope that you were able to take some of these things away from Wendell and Erica as well. Just a couple of things that I thought I'd kind of remind you of as we close out today. Conflict in itself is not sin. Conflict is normal. We're all going to face these kinds of things, but it's not sin. How we deal with it might be sinful, but we have a choice of how we do that. And I think a lot of the steps that we outlined today hopefully we'll be helpful for that. And I also just really resonated with what I think Wendell said, that most of our conflicts have the most intensity with the people we love the most over the issues we care about the most. And that's why this is so tricky. But as Erica said at one point, as believers, our goal should always be to reconcile relationships. So I hope that is possible for you as you're getting ready to get together for Thanksgiving, and as things in the world continue to be complicated. Let's be those agents of peace and be peacemakers in our families, in our workplace, wherever you find yourself. I know it's hard, but it's worthwhile work. So as we kind of finish the conversation there, I hope that you and me and everyone listening today can be a good example of how we can reconcile peace in the world that we're in. So thanks again so much for listening. We're really grateful for all of you who tune in each week. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you here in a couple weeks back on Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.